say, I don't know if Jess, is his light in his face too? Because it's reflecting on his glasses and stuff. Can you move? Yeah. Let me see.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. It happens to me. It's the computer
That's
screen.
perfect. Well, no, I was just saying his light was shining. So that's good. That's a good.
Let me see if this is doable.
Okay. I just want you guys to know that it is thundering and lightning down here in rain.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
yes,
wow.
it is.
Okay, and one other thing is after I introduce him, I'm going to put myself on mute, and if you will too, Ron, that way it'll keep on the two speakers as far as what actually records. So let me push the, all right, we are recording. Welcome everybody to our interview session this afternoon. I'm going to give a brief introduction of who we are and why we're here. So my name is Jessica Boye. I am the Vice Chair of the Cornelius Historic Preservation Committee, and we have been working on a Black History Month project for 2021, which is a virtual tour of the Smithville area by visiting geographic points and also visiting points in our history to tell the story of the Smithville community. And now that we've talked to a whole bunch of community members about the past, and we've got a little bit of a gauge on the present, we have some people here with us who's going to describe some of the future plans for Smithville. I'm going to introduce Willie Jones. Willie is currently on the board of directors of the Smithville Community Coalition. He's been serving on that board for 5 years. He is retired, but currently is serving as the development consultant for the revitalization plan of Smithville. Willie's background, a little bit about him. He has worked in community development for over 35 years. He has been responsible for large-scale revitalization plans in more than 10 cities. And these plans have been actually implemented, and our people are living in these communities that he has been part of the redesign plans for. He's worked for one of the largest nonprofits that works on mixed income housing, affordable housing, workforce housing for 30 years. So he is very experienced in the matter, and he's also taught graduate programs in real estate at for urban planning at MIT, and has a degree from seminary from Harvard Divinity School. All right, and now he is current Cornelius resident, and this is where he's called home. So he has a special calling to help Smithville with their revitalization plans as we hit this important turning point in Cornelius history. So welcome, Willie. Thank you for your time and being here today. Did I get about right on your bio? Is there anything you want to add I might have forgotten?
Yeah, let me clarify. My seminary degree is from Hood in Salisbury. I used to teach at Harvard. I taught a class at Harvard Divinity School in their summer leadership program for churches who are developing, doing economic development in their neighborhoods.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you for that clarification. And I'm going to turn it over to Miss Lisa Mayhew Jones, who's also serving on the SCC board for lifetime, I believe. I don't know if we can put a number to that. And she's got some questions she's going to ask Willie so we can all understand the development plans as they stand.
Okay, thank you, Jess. Thank you, Willie. I'm so glad you were able to fit us into your very busy schedule. And I also like to say that, and I don't mind saying this, if there hadn't been a Willie Jones to come to Cornelius and move into Cornelius and find out and learn about Smithfield, I don't know if Smithfield would be here, because he's been with us for 5 years, and we started back in 2011, and we actually didn't gain much momentum until we met Willie, and Willie came in and got involved. So I am willing to say on this video that he is definitely our saving grace. Whether people want to acknowledge that or not, I am going to acknowledge that. Now, with that said, Willie, I got a couple of questions here I want to ask you. And the first one, I would like to know if it's possible, could you kind of give us a small synopsis of what the Smithfield revitalization plan is about?
Okay. The plan is about really three things. Justice for the history of discrimination and disparate treatment to the residents of Smithfield. It's about protecting the continued presence to make sure they can stay there. And the third thing is figuring out how to integrate new people into the old Smithfield. So those are kind of three larger goals. I think at a more granular level, what we're doing is redeveloping vacant land and places that have abandoned buildings. We are not taking over Smithfield. We are not forcing people to do anything, but we are focusing on the places where people are not and are fundamentally blighted. And we believe that if we don't do something about these, ultimately the market will buy these up and we'll end up with homes that will displace or change the quality of life of the existing residents.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, let me ask you this. Can you please define blight and what it means in Smithfield? And can you say how many vacant lots, homes, and homes that are in poor condition?
Okay. Blight is basically when you have empty urban parcels or vacant buildings that are not utilized. And they're not adding to the tax rolls. They're not adding to the quality of life. It's not like they're a park or anything. Typically, they require some investment by somebody else to cut the grass, to make sure there's no trash on it, to make sure that there are no illegal activities going on it, and so forth. So that's what we're talking about when we say empty, vacant land and abandoned buildings are blighted. There's a social cost that goes to not having those buildings and those properties online. And quite frankly, it holds back the evolution and unity of a community because you end up with people who don't live there doing stuff there that impact the folks who do live there, if that makes any sense. In terms of if you strip all of this away and let's just talk about the real estate, Smithfield is located between Ferry to the east, Nanny Potts Lane to the south, US 21 or Statesville Road to the west, and it dead ends at the Union Bethel Cemetery to the north. So those are the boundaries of Smithfield. Most of what we're talking about is south of Catawba Avenue. And so there are in Smithfield, including north of Catawba and south of Catawba, there are approximately 154 parcels of land. And there are approximately, in that 154 parcels, there are approximately 81 occupied homes and roughly 71 empty lots or lots without occupants in Smithfield. Of the 81 occupied units, approximately 57 are owner occupied. And of the owner occupied units, 38 of the 57 are owned by seniors. And we're not talking about like 55-year-old seniors. We're talking about seniors.
Okay. Well, can I ask you this then? Out of those lots, how many lots are owned by the town or are owned by other entities that are not related or any relation with Smithfield residents? Because we do know that Smithfield residents owned all of Smithfield at one time. So can you answer that one for me?
Yeah, the town owns approximately 10 lots in Smithfield, not counting Smithfield Park. 10 formerly residential lots. And there, what has happened in Smithville happens in a lot of older African-American communities. Investors scour the tax records and find an outstanding tax liability. And most of the time, the people with the outstanding tax liability don't really live there. And in the case of Smithville, and I've talked to not a dozen, but I know I've talked to 8 or 10 people who are paying taxes. The profile of those people continuing to pay taxes, they're seniors. B, they typically lived in that house at some point in time before it was demolished. They are living right now. Some are living in elderly housing, some are living with family, but they pay their taxes because they don't want to lose that land they don't want, quote unquote, the white people to take their land. Okay, so they make a significant sacrifice. Now, the problem you run into is that when you're on that fixed income, you've got all these things that are battling, you've got health, you got your medical costs, you've got, you name it, and most of these folks, because of segregation and racism, work low-paying jobs. Okay, so Social Security is their primary source of income. What investors do when they scour the rolls, find outstanding tax liabilities, generally speaking, in excess of $5,000. Okay. They'll go to that person and say, I'll buy your land and take this obligation off of you. And they get the land at a discount, and sometimes a significant discount. Okay, now back to your original question, how many of those are there in Smithfield? It's hard to answer that question with precision because very often the investors don't actually change the name on the title until they're ready to. So I can give you $5,000 and I can technically close on that land 2 years later. Okay, so we don't know the exact answer. I can tell you that there are 4 that I know of. And I found that out really through family members, because there's no paper trail quite yet. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, let me ask you this question. How are the residents, how is this plan going to help the existing residents? Because I do know that that is part of the plan not to displace anyone, but how will it help the residents? And also I want to ask, when and if this does pass and you have the new homes, be it apartments, homes, condos, whatever, will the people or even the heirs of Smithfield residents, will it be affordable for them? Because I think that's the main thing I like to, the affordability of this plan, I think, in based of the residents of the people that are there. Is that okay?
Yeah, good. I mean, it's a good question. First off, in terms of protections, it is important that we protect the existing people who own homes in Smithville. And we're trying to do that in at least a couple of ways. The first one is we're looking at a historic district overlay. Now, the protecting residents kind of fall under 2 categories. One is making it really difficult to displace them. Okay, so you have to have a defensive approach as well as an offensive approach. Within the defensive approach, the historic district would allow us to protect many of the original houses. So we did a drive-through this past weekend with someone who's helping us on the historic stuff. And we identified quite a number of homes that would fall into that category as kind of original homes. Some of them have been refurbished, but they're there. And I think we can find ways to protect them. The second thing we talked about was finding ways to, in addition to that, the defensive piece is the subdivision next to Ron that he doesn't live in, but the one his brother lives in, I believe may have been the first subdivision in North Mecklenburg, actually Mecklenburg, after the passage of the Fair Housing Act.
Okay.
So that's worth saving and I think memorializing in some way. So we're thinking about ways that we can use historic designation to eliminate or to prevent or to slow down the risk of people buying a house, knocking it down and putting a McMansion or something else that would change the tax base for all the neighbors, which is part of how people get displaced through taxes. So there's a defensive piece that we are trying to put in place. Then I think in terms of on the offensive side, this program does several things. I think first off, what we try to do is we have we're incorporating into our financial structure 25 units that we will give the owners $10,000 a piece for a right of first refusal. Okay, that $10,000 doesn't require them to do anything. If they want to do repairs on their homes, allow them to age in place or what have you, they can do that. All right, so providing that capital is important. The second thing is we want to set aside some money that if you live next to the revitalization, you may have some things done to your house as a part of that. Well, we want to be able to capture those repairs, but also if you live next to the revitalization and we put in a new street with sewers, now you need new connections from your house to the sewer line. So we want to put in those things as part of enhancing the quality of life and making sure that people's properties operate more and more efficiently. The other thing we want to do is to the extent that we access the rear of properties, we want to give everybody who's existing there parking pads and so forth. So they would inure directly from that. Now and we're also looking at, as part of the historic stuff, and I'm bouncing back, we want to set up a fund that can help finance changes to historic structures. And so we believe we can fundraise for that, but you got to put seed money in it in order to do it. Okay, so we think that we can answer the question of making your life better as a homeowner by virtue of this plan, even though we're not doing anything to your home, we're not displacing you, but we're able to provide some resources that can change the quality of your life and also allow you to age in place and stay in Smithville as long as you and your family want. Now, in terms of people, the benefits to Smithfield residents or people with a history of Smithfield, we've identified kind of 4 different categories that would get priorities within Smithville. The first is Smithville residents. If you currently live in Smithville, you will have the highest priority for getting new homes in Smithville. The second priority would go to heirs of people who can demonstrate a historic tie to Smithville. Okay, so even though like we may have this lot and your granddaddy died, but if you can demonstrate that you were an heir to your granddaddy, then you fall into the second category in terms of prioritization. The third thing we're proposing is employees of the town of Cornelius would be the third priority. The fourth priority would be first responders in Mecklenburg County. And the fifth priority would be CMS employees. Okay, so we're consciously trying to do things that will give people who don't typically have access to these resources or access to some priorities, give them an opportunity to do something that they would not otherwise be able to do, and to become neighbors with people who want folks who would value being in Smithville. It's not an investment, it's a place to live. And so that's really key to what we're doing, structuring the rents as well as the home sales for people who can, for people who are working people. And when we get to the next question, I'll talk about like rents and home sales and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, let me see. Coming off of that question, I'd like to ask you this. How, Jess, they'll be able to edit, right? Because I want to come back on that question that he just, well, with that said, and let me know, what are the ranges in the prices, the rents, how much the homes will go for, what range? Because I do know in Cornelius, the average home starts at like 225, 250, if I'm not mistaken. Somewhere like
that. I don't know where that one is.
Mm.
If it's, Ron, do you know where that one is?
Well, isn't the house up the street $225,000 down from Sammy? Wasn't that a 250? It was a 250, right?
But I think the average price is more like 350.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or Cornelius.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. For Cornelius, yeah. I'm sorry.
We're in next to Smithfield, that community. I can't remember the name.
Victoria Bay.
Don't they? Not Victoria Bay, but that's across from the field. I thought we were told that those homes start around 225, 250, that are in between where the field is.
Yeah, those are houses that need some significant investment. No, they need investment.
I got you.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't use those as the benchmark.
Okay, I got you. Well, but before you answer the question about the rent and the prices, let me ask you this though. Well, no, go ahead and answer that, and then I'll come back to that one.
Well, for ease of editing, why don't you ask your question?
Well, let me ask you. So my question is going to be, with that being said, but with your plans and with your neighbors, because we do have a neighboring community and all that. Now, how is that? Will that affect them any type of way that would be cause for maybe this community to say, hey, hold on, we don't want this plant? You got what I'm saying? How does that affect that neighboring?
The adjacent neighborhood?
Yes. Yeah.
I think what the pressure needs to be on creating workforce housing, as opposed to forcing people to live in distress housing just to make sure that the prices stay low. Okay, so this should put more pressure on the town, the county, and even the state to provide resources so that working people don't have to live in housing that substandard housing. And so I think what we're doing will, once I think people see that what we're doing can be of such benefit, there'll be more pressure to do more of it. That's okay. Now, in terms of, the structure here, we're talking about somewhere between probably 65 and 70 rental units. And they'll be targeting people who are at 50% or less of the area median income. Now, we got two major challenges in the middle of this. One is we've got seniors who will likely need a place to stay. So we've got to create rents that current seniors can live with. So if we're assuming a senior is going to sell their house, we have to help them put together a plan for the next however many years of their life. And so for those folks, I think we're trying to do 30% of area median income, which is roughly $450 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. Okay, so that's
Seniors.
yeah. Well, the 1-bedrooms I think will likely be targeted to seniors,
Okay.
just because that's A, population need,
Mhm.
and B, a lot of seniors have more house than they can manage, and they want to stay in the neighborhood. So we're trying to design this such that there's a senior section and a family section
Mhm.
within the particular structure. So I think the seniors, we're looking at, rents, depending on what they make, but as low as $450 a month. And I think for working people, we're looking at rents as high as for a family of 3, up to $1,000 a month. Okay, that it's more than I'd like to pay, but the truth is that that's a working rent in this metro area. Now, the way we get there is that we have to produce the housing cheaper. And the way we produce the housing cheaper isn't by making it cheap. We do that by, when we acquire all the land, we will end up setting aside free land for the rental development. Okay, so if you were in Charlotte, you would have the Charlotte Trust Fund. And the trust fund would give you, $1.5 million. Okay, well, if we can give you free land, and if we can structure the transaction so that the transaction doesn't have to pay real estate taxes, then we can compete for larger state resources. So that's the basic plan for the rental component. We have 15 units that are targeted to people at 60% of AMI, 45 units targeted to people who are at 80% of AMI, 25 units targeted people at 100% AMI, and 12 units targeted to people at 120% of AMI. Okay, so what are these house prices? What does that mean in the real world? It means that the sales price for those houses at 60% of AMI would be roughly $247,000. The people who are at 80%, it would be roughly $266,000. At 100%, $286,000. And 120%, $296,000. Okay, so the whole neighborhood is less than $300,000. And we'll put some deed restrictions in place. But the key thing here is those 5 priorities I talked about before, click in. So instead of, we won't have a broker who puts up signs and everything. We'll do this through a lottery. Okay, so anyone who's interested puts their name in a lottery, and then the lottery selects randomly based on the priorities. Okay, so what that means then is that we'll know who qualifies way early, and it gives us a year. Once we know that you're in the lottery system and you're high in the queue, we can make sure that you get training. We can make sure you get all the educational supports necessary to in fact qualify. And then on top of that, we have found a lender, who will do loans at relatively low down payments. Okay, so all of that will be packaged. But the key thing here is we're targeting working people. And what we do is through land costs, we subsidize the incomes. So the reason we needed 120% AMI was because we have to cross subsidize the people at 60% AMI. Okay, and so rather than charge more for 60%, we just create more 120% units that can cross subsidize. Okay, so that's the basic framework. I hope that makes sense. And poor Jessica, you've got to edit this.
Okay, now with that said, and you're saying that 60% AMI will be the lowest, right? So, and I just want to ask that question. A person that qualifies for 60% AMI, can you give me estimate of what they make a year?
Yeah. The 60%, this is for the Charlotte Metro.
Mhm.
This is the House Charlotte program.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So 60% of AMI for one person is 35,100. For a two-person household is 40,080. For a three-person household is 45,120. And a family of four is 50,100. Okay, so what I did when we were putting together the income targeting was to actually target about 40%
Mhm.
of AMI. I'm sorry, 50% of AMI for the 60% units. And what that has to do with really is trying to figure out, there's a point at which you'll have too many debts to be underwritten. Okay, so you may have income, you may have decent credit, but your debt to income ratios are off. And so we're trying to create enough wiggle room in there so that people don't have to actually have exactly this amount. And that if they're, relatively close, we can find ways of matriculating them. And that's important, I think, particularly for the residents. We don't want to do this and be in a situation where the residents of Smithfield could not participate in this opportunity, nor their heirs. Okay, so we're trying to structure this in such a way that it enhances the likelihood of being able to make this available to the historic Smithfield families.
Okay. So Willie, since you've been around now for quite a few years, and you've been working with the plan, can you just give me a little feel of what do you think the residents of Smithfield up to this point, how they're feeling about the plan? What do you gather? What do you think the feeling is?
First off, I think you've got some hurdles in Smithville. It's kind of like people walk up to the edge of a creek. And you really got to jump over the creek, step over it, walk through it or something, but you can't stay on the edge forever. And I think part of where people are at is they need a reason to believe. One of the things that's happened historically in African-American neighborhoods is the distrust between the people and the politicians is pretty deep. So in the case of Smithville, until they believe that the town and the county is willing to do this, they're going to stand at the edge of the stream and look over. Okay, that's the key. So that's why we have pushed so hard with the town to say you support this in some meaningful and tangible way. So I think that's the first thing we've got to solve for. I think the second thing we've got to solve for is sometimes it seems easier to believe nothing's going to happen until the bulldozers are at your door. Okay. And because Smithfield has never, what's magnificent about Smithfield is it has been there like 100 years. It's like been hidden underneath a tree. Like ain't nobody noticed it,
Yeah.
And so some people believe that it'll stay under that tree. Okay. And I think, you add things like QT, you add some things that all of a sudden people are walking underneath that tree and they can see. Okay. And so the future of Smithville, based on investors attempting to purchase properties, you see some investors have bought properties, rehabbed them, and turned them into rentals. And you see a situation where new properties are being developed on the edge of Smithville. Okay. though that trend will continue, and in fact, it will get faster. And I think people, for some reason, still don't believe that just because it's across the street, it ain't Smithville.
Hmm?
Well, they're going they're going to eventually cross that street, and then it'll be too late. So I think figuring out how to help people walk through that is an important part of their own of the residents' growth and evolution. Then I think the third piece is it's easy to talk about the divide between Black and white. And when you are unclear, you can fall back on the historical patterns of you can never trust white people. I'll put it that way. So it's important on our part to create a plan that's doable, first off, like no pie in the sky stuff. It has to be doable and technically sound. And of all the things with the Smithville plan, see, nobody said it's not doable. Nobody's ever looked at it and said, Willie, these numbers don't make any sense. Okay, anybody who reads it agrees that the concept is sound, the numbers are basically sound. So I think that's the first piece. It's something that's not going to embarrass people. I think the second thing is we need, in addition to elected people, we need a broader community of Cornelius residents to say this is a good thing and we should be doing it. Okay, and I think that will help move people. But you and I doing it, we can yell to the top of our lungs. All it means is that we're saying the same thing we've been saying. However, when you have more people who've never said it before saying it, then I think people get more confidence in it. And so that's part of why we are presenting before the town board on March 1st. It's also why I'm redoing another iteration of this plan for broader distribution. It's also why I was setting up presentations to the county. It's also why we're formally going to be submitting a new budget proposal to the county. It's why we're going to be sending stuff to the to the Trust for Historic Preservation. It's why we're going to be sitting with banks, asking them to participate in this. So we're going to, this spring is a full-scale onslaught of people who has said it's a good idea. Okay, now give us some money for this good idea.
Money where your mouth is that what you?
Yeah, and I think all of those things combined will have also a greater effect on people's confidence that this is going to happen. But I think once people feel that this is real, I'm not worried about whether or not they'll cross the river. They'll definitely cross that creek, but we got to make it real enough so that staying at home isn't easier than crossing the creek.
Okay, I like that, Willie. And you covered within that question a lot of the funding that is going to take place. And I just like to ask you a question because how and because you talked about how the relationship, the distrust, how would you look coming into Cornelius and being involved with Smithfield? How would you think the relationship or the residents in the town? And I'm not speaking and asking you to speak from an SCC standpoint. I'm asking you this question based on just being a resident of Cornelius. You've been involved in what's going on, as far as the historically Black community. Let's say if you had nothing to do with this, or what do you think the residents, or how do they feel about the town? And I mean, mind you now, SCC started back in 2011. And then of course, you've been here with us about 5, almost 6 years. What do you think the feel in the residents is about the town, the town management, period?
one of the things about Smithville is you've got some historical residents here who this is the only place they've ever lived. It's the only place their parents ever lived. And in some cases, the only place their grandparents ever lived. Okay, so their frame of reference carries many generations of history. Okay, within those generations of history, there's been segregation, redlining, and lack of investment in Smithville. So it shouldn't come as a shock that they're highly skeptical at this point in history that the town or the county will be any different. Now we've got to remember that Smithville was segregated as unincorporated Mecklenburg County. Okay, so you got the county who has a history, and you got the town who has a history in relationship to Smithville. And so that's why it's important that we have the town and county do stuff. Not just talk about it being a good idea, but to actually do stuff, because it runs counter to the historical narrative that people are used to, and the facts line up with the historical narrative that people are used to. So you really do have to change some of the facts in people's minds in order for them to believe. And that's not asking too much. I mean, that's logical. So that's the way I tend to approach it. I also think there are elements of I think there are elements of like I'm gonna make some money. There's always entrepreneurialism that operates within the real estate sphere, and so people will whisper in folks' ear and say, no, if you do this plan, your house isn't gonna escalate in value the way that you would like it to escalate in value. So that really brings us to this issue of there are always trade-offs. Okay, you can do things that work for individuals and they can do well, but the community suffers. Or you can do things that have broad public benefit, but may make the individual returns less significant. Okay, so I want to say we've in the course of this plan, we have made the decision that the neighborhood itself is more important than a handful of people who could significantly benefit if the plan doesn't proceed.
Okay. All right, and I'm gonna put these two questions together because these are the last two, but you kind of almost answered them. But let me ask you this: what's the biggest challenges facing the plan, and if the plan does not go through, what is the alternative, or are there any other alternatives for Smithfield?
Well, let me answer the second one first.
Okay.
The other alternatives for Smithville are way less good. Because you got Smithville has a lot of ain't gats, as my grandma used to say. That's the way she talked about my sister's boyfriend. She used to say, that boy got a lot of ain't gats.
He ain't got this, ain't got that.
Exactly. He ain't got no car. He ain't got no job. He ain't. When you're in an environment where you have a lot of ain't gats, you become a victim. Okay. Capital will go to where it can get a significant return. And we've fought for a long time, and we've done all these things to thwart capital. Right now, our biggest benefit is that we know whose land has title problems. And not only that, we know how to solve the title problems. And we've invested through pro bono assistance probably easily $50,000 in legal time to figure that out. Okay, so as long as we're sitting there, it's hard for them to aggregate enough parcels to take over Smithville. But in the future, what will happen is what we've seen. That is, you can buy a parcel or two and put a bigger house on it. You can repeat that pattern through Smithville, and it can be a perfectly good pattern. The only problem is it'll drive up your taxes. Okay, it doesn't fix your sewer smell. Okay, so you end up with a new neighborhood and an old neighborhood, and quite frankly, it'll end up looking and feeling like apartheid. Because the people who are buying the new houses are likely to be white and of a higher income, probably significantly higher income. And then you've got these other folks over here who are trapped because they're seniors, they have older housing stock, needs much more of an investment. And so you, over time, those are the people who lose out. So I think that's the scenario that will happen if we don't get funded. Now, back to the funding, let me go back to the first question. We've been told that the county, we've been working with them for 2+ years now. And even the mayor has said that the county has signaled to him that they want to do this and they want to make this happen. Okay, so we're trying to answer the questions that they pose to us and the concerns they pose to us. And this time when we go in with those questions answered. That's kind of the way we're approaching it. You know, and I think because of the pandemic, because of obviously some strained tax revenue, we have to be flexible enough to figure out how to fund the plan based on how they can give us the money. And so for right now, we have this plan that from the time we receive money until the time we finish this sucker is about 12 quarters, which is 12 divided by 4, which is about 3 years. You know, it won't this isn't complicated. This isn't like a complicated place. There, you know, it's not as if there was a gold factory there before and we have to clean up all of the waste. You know, you had cows and pigs and you know, probably occasionally a brother-in-law that you want to get rid of. No, but you don't have to go through extensive regulatory stuff here. It's the streams that have to be figured out. Okay, so we have our master plan has an approach that puts in new streets, puts in new water management, you know, the whole 9 yards. So it's not that complicated. It's really, you buy the land, you improve the land, you build houses on it, and then you go home. Or I go back, in my case, I go back to retirement.
I got you. Okay. So, well, Willie, I want to thank you for that. But just one last question, because I know your report that you have there, you're giving it 3 years to, you know, based upon to get everything done. How long does, if no funding, if nothing happens, how long would you think Smithfield would survive? Honestly.
I think that the tipping point in Smithville will likely come somewhere around 2013, 2014.
No,
I think at that point in time,
wait. Do those years again. 2023,
2013, 2023.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I lost a decade in there. 2023, 2024, I suspect will be the tipping point.
Okay.
At that point, it will be, you won't be able to undo it. And if you look at the parcels that investors are targeting now, they've been in the business as long as I have. I'm monitoring the same parcels they're monitoring, and I know that it'll pick up speed.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got so many people who own land who aren't there, and they're paying taxes, and they're like 75 and 80.
Yeah.
Okay, so the year we had where I think it was like 5 people died,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you only have to have another bad year like that. And the heirs, the children and grandchildren, they're not moving back here. They're
Right.
selling the property.
Right.
Okay, so I think we could go through a quite rapid transformation, but we won't see it until structures go up.
Would that rapid transformation meaning gentrification,
Oh yes,
Smithfield?
seriously,
Okay.
seriously, serious gentrification.
Now, serious gentrification, but I want to say this now, and I know doing nothing is rapid and serious. Doing your plan, does that cause any type of gentrification, or does it slow it down? Because you're putting in new properties, your value's going to change, your tax rate's going to go up. Will that cause a slower rate of gentrification, or will it not cause gentrification at all?
Glad you asked that question.
And that's my last question.
Glad you asked that question.
Yes.
This program is an anti-gentrification program. And the way we do it is, and that's why it's important that we buy up all the house, buy up all the vacant land and abandoned buildings, because then we set the values. The market doesn't set the values. And so we can say, in our case, I have a graphic, but I can't, I won't put it on the screen. But in our case, we can say, this is what the land costs, because we've written it down based on public resources. Okay, and so I'll show this graphic, which in our case here, we have the cost of a house. And one of the things we're doing is we're normalizing houses. So you can't come here for affordability and build a cheap house. Okay, so we'll select builders based on the quality of their design and that design having been done before. That is, we got to go be able to look at it. Okay, so they will have an allowance for the building and for the lot grading. We will put in all of the infrastructure. And so they will sell the house at, they'll make their markup and they'll make their profit, but there's no developer profit on top of it. Okay. And in terms of us aggregating the land, the biggest return typically is on land. So if we were to buy this and it was a farm, then you could put a 20% return on capital, and you probably could get investors. This is like messy stuff. Okay, you gotta like talk to Sister Sarah, you gotta talk to Mr. Johnson, you gotta, this is like retail, retail used car sales. So we know that if we can do that stuff, we can put in the streets, we can put in infrastructure, but more importantly, we can put deed restrictions on everything. Okay, so in order to live here, you're gonna live in a house that's walking distance to everything. But the flip side is your values are going to be constrained by deed restrictions. And if you don't want a deed restriction, don't come here.
Gotcha.
Okay, and so we'll keep this available for working class people. And we'll do it in such a way that even though the house values will be probably $350. We'll be giving them to you for $275, but you've got to agree to be a part of this thing. And this thing is Smithville. You have to be comfortable and happy to live in a historically African-American neighborhood. We're going to do art. We're going to do some things that will clearly define and uphold the history and applaud the history, of this neighborhood. And so, if you don't want to be too close to Black folks, don't come here. Okay. If you don't want to be too close to old people, don't come here. Okay. If you don't want to be too close to people who make a lot of noise on holidays and stuff, don't come here. Okay. So what we're saying is, this is one where we set the rules. Okay. And because we set the rules, we can manage the gentrification risk. Okay, this isn't like because the market is typically what drives gentrification. Okay, we will be able to control that to a quite significant extent and stuff. So, when I'm no longer doing this, there'll be people talking about my name and it won't be nice. There'll be people in the process talking, people now talk about me and it's not nice. But I think that what we're doing is in the best interest of the current residents of Smithville. And I think what we're doing as it relates to the future, it gives them some assurances and some safeguards about their future. And the good part is that they ain't got to do nothing. You ain't got to move your house. You don't have to do anything. All of these are benefits that you receive as a part of this revitalization. And you don't bear the burdens of the revitalization.
Willie, thank you. I mean, that you've always put it plain and clear, but this right here really breaks it down, even ABC 1, 2, 3. And I greatly appreciate it. And thank you so much. Jess, thank you again for allowing us and helping us get this together. Ron, thank you too. Ron, you have any words you want to?
Well, other than just thanking Willie, I just want to make sure that if there's anything that has been omitted that he would like to cover.
Thank you, Ron.
I can look at all my pages here.
It'll be edited.
Okay, thanks. I think the only other thing, in terms of giving character, we have a combination of townhomes and single families. Okay, so there are some things we need community input on. So for instance, I'm gonna go through this issue triggered it. We need community input on historic district. What are the issues in a historic district that are important? A. B, we need community input and support on a new land use plan. We intend to get a Smithville land use plan and make it incredibly difficult for somebody to go through zoning that doesn't comply with the plan. Okay. That's the second thing we need folks to be involved in. I think the third thing is we need to establish some design guidelines. So this place doesn't look like Mickey Mouse. And we want the community and residents to participate in the process of establishing some design guidelines. And I think lastly, we want to think about things like what other amenities need to be added, some over time. So for instance, in this package, we're proposing to purchase the school. And we the package has money to purchase it, but also we've got money to renovate it.
Mhm.
But but we need to figure out what happens there. Is that part of the rental development, or is that a standalone? Do we put services in there, or do we get it fixed up and run this development? Is revitalization out of there? Whatever. But we've got to have some conversations about that, and then we've got to have some harder conversations about there are questions that will come up about density that people need to be educated on. You got this little house sitting on this thing that's
Yes.
almost 300 feet long, and that looks like normal, which it really is not normal. So we have to have some conversations about density. I suspect that happens in the land use plan discussions. And we have to have some discussion about the introduction of new products into the neighborhood. So for instance, when we start talking about design guidelines, I used to travel across the country. I was, that was my job. A new house in Seattle is a modern design. It's a box. It doesn't have gable roofs. It's a modern design. So when we start thinking about the future of Smithville, how broad do we want our neighborhood to look? Those are questions I think that residents need to be, engaged in. And that, flows over to questions like, do you want, townhouses? How many townhouses can you put together at one time before the appetite, gets a little bit weird and so forth. So there are questions that relate to the whole neighborhood that we'll need, I think over this period where we are finishing up planning and buying land, we'll be having regular meetings to try to discuss these types of issues.